Well, joining the conversation is a good friend of mine. We've known each other for a long time. I'm talking about famed former FBI criminal profiler, Candice DeLong. Now, she is also host of an amazing podcast, Killer Psyche. Also joining us virtually from Syracuse University is renowned media scholar and professor of television and pop culture, Robert Thompson. Bob, when you look at this and other series, Manhunter and things where they really dig into killers, serial killers, what do you think the impact of that is on the general population that consumes that through their television?
Well, I think, and it's so hard to talk about this after hearing the stories of people who survived actual encounters. But I think we have to make a distinction between the people these stories are about and regular people's interest in those stories. I don't think it means that we are sick as a population to be fascinated by stories like these. We go through life with an idea of what's ideal, the way the world should be. And when we encounter the real heart of darkness, something that completely goes against anything that we think is right in humanity, in the world, it is fascinating. And I think there's a difference between the people who make these, the people who watch them, and the people for whom they're about, that we have to be careful we keep that distinction clear.
Well, you bring up such wise counsel in that regard. It clearly, for somebody that it's about, or even someone that's been through a similar situation, even if it's not about that particular killer, there's no doubt that it can trigger things for them. So it clearly has a different impact on gentlemen like you and Rita, whose brother was taken, and the 20 families that were involved, than it does for the rest of us. Now, the question is, has our culture's obsession with true crime desensitized us? Take a look at this sample from social media.
Have you watched the new Jeffrey Dahmer series yet? No, I don't really have any interest in watching that. Really? I'm like obsessed with true crime, so I watched it immediately as soon as it came out. I took the day off of work just so I could binge it all. I didn't even get up to eat or use the bathroom. I ordered diapers just so I could sit there in bed all day.
Women make up the vast majority of true crime fans. We are obsessed with it.
Her arms were cut off. Her legs were cut off. Her ears were cut off. Her tongue was cut off. Her nose was cut off.
Jeffrey Dahmer is hot. Apparently, there's a whole community of people on the internet that seem to think Jeffrey Dahmer is very, very attractive.
How likely is it that this guy can kill me? Male, about 5'9", probably says he's 5'10". Creepy mustache, I'm gonna say chances are very likely.
So I was gonna go on a nice walk in the forest. Then I remember what I learned from all the true crime I've been watching, and statistically speaking, I probably might not make it out of here alive.
I never worry about my husband killing me and getting away with it. I've seen how he cleans.
So I realized I must watch too much true crime, because when I got my coffee, it was like 8:24, and I was like, for my alibi. What alibi?
Do you guys in the audience, do you learn something from watching some of these shows? Okay, right over here.
I'm a huge fan of true crime and Candice's shows as well. I watched 2 or 3 episodes of the Dahmer, and I could not watch it anymore. Mm-hmm. I've seen all of the other true crime series, and for some reason, this one really affected me, and I could not watch the entire series. I felt for the victims. It was just so disturbing. I could not watch.
How would you describe Jeffrey as a youngster when you were growing up?
Excuse me, doctor, if you don't mind. We don't know. We don't relate to Jeffrey.
Okay, Jeff.
He's Jeff.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me ask you some things that, and I think these are right and accurate from your book. I understand that hindsight is 20/20, so I'm sure that these things will look different now. But Jeff was fascinated with a rotting animal carcass under the house and played with the bones and referred to them as fiddlesticks.
It was a terrible smell, so I went underneath and cleaned it out, the smell of the skunk, and cleaned out whatever else was under, cans and bones, and collected them all. And Jeff did seem to exhibit an interest in the way they clanked as he picked them up and put them back into the metal pail. He just laughed at it, the sound of it, and that was it.
It was said that he had even impaled a dog's head on a stick. And this, again, is something you only learned about in
At
trial.
the trial. I asked him about that, and he said that it was back in the woods, 2 neighbors away from us. I saw a picture of it.
So he admitted that that was true.
He said he found this dog. I don't know if it's really true, to be honest with you, but he told me that he found this dog that he decapitated and put on a stake.
And do you believe that there were warning signs that as a father you should have seen? If your kid is going around collecting dead animals, cutting them open and exploring them and that sort of thing, how do you not know that?
Well, as I said, it's heavily wooded, very rough terrain, and there are a lot of hiding places. He was extremely secretive and devious.
Candace, what's your reaction to how they're describing him and his early behavior?
Considering what eventually happened and what they became aware of that he did as an adult, then looking back, certainly if it were me, my gosh, why didn't I do something?
Tell me about the locked wooden box that you confronted him about.
On several occasions, my mother had complained about seeing some pornography around. So when I made the visit to Milwaukee, I saw this box in the closet in his room. I said, I'm going to open it. And I started going down to the basement to get a tool to open up the box. And he kept complaining that he couldn't even have 1 foot square of his own property to do with what he wants. And I said, I'm going to open it anyway, find out what's in here. Because that's what I thought it was, something related to pornography. And in fact, he convinced me to just wait till tomorrow, Dad, he said. And I'll open it for you then, but just don't do anything now. I don't want to disturb Grandma, because she was in a nearby room and she heard all this commotion that I was going through with Jeff. And so I'm in a way I'm glad, but in a way I'm not glad that I didn't press it, because if I would have opened that box and found what was in there, I think I would have lost it. Then the next day he opened it and he said, see, this is what it was. And in fact, he had stuffed some pornographic magazines in there.
But we now know the box contained a human head.
Yes.
And
it would have stopped. And I said, well, what would you have done, Jeff, if I'd opened it? And he said something like, the jig would have been up. Just something non-emotional, non-committal. More lives would have been saved.
so, Bob, this is straight from a horror genre script, right?
Yes, this is very much a horror movie kind of thing. The big difference is in horror movies, whether it's Michael Myers or Freddy Krueger or whoever, they kill fictional people, and those fictional people have fictional relatives. Here we've got a story which has affected all kinds of people who are still alive and who are still able to see this. I would say one quick thing we haven't mentioned yet, that as much as, and glamorizing almost always happens, especially with a 10-part show, but this film actually does make at least some concerted efforts to talk about some things that I think the other Dahmer movies and others haven't. And that is this idea of, how did he keep getting away with this? Why were the police responses to people who kept calling as bad as they were? When the Reverend Jackson, or the actor that plays Reverend Jackson, comes in the last half of this series, we do begin to get those arguments of policing issues, of underserved communities. And by the time this whole thing is over, I think some consciousness has been raised about how something like this was allowed to happen 17 times over.
How could he wind up to be this murderer, this serial killer?
I thought that he, at some point in his age 12 to 14, when he was coming out of puberty, his sexual engine, so to speak, was in high drive, and he was touching the insides of these animals, that he just sort of got hardwired neuronally into connecting the sexual pleasure with this type of activity, entrails, insides of bodies. That's the way I thought about it after thinking about it for a while. At first, I couldn't fathom how he turned out to be this far down the continuum. I mean, we're all on a continuum. We all do bad things. We all sin. He was at the extreme of this continuum. I couldn't at first understand how he could have done those things.
Did you ask him, did you say, Jeff, how in the world could you make this okay in your mind?
I was concentrating mostly on getting him into a psychiatric hospital. I didn't ask him that specifically, but I did tell him, Jeff, we've got to find out how on earth you could have done these things.
Well, Candace, unpack that.
You think serial killers are created. And what we do know, there is a clinical disorder, antisocial personality disorder. And it pretty much speaks for, antisocial, and it's a personality disorder. I call it a chink in the DNA armor. It's there. For example, if you're blonde, you're blonde. You can color your hair dark, but your DNA says you're a blonde. Antisocial personality disorder can be broken down into two categories, psychopath, sociopath. The simple way to look at it is psychopaths are born. Sociopaths are made. Now, having studied hundreds of people that commit horrible crimes, serial killers or mass murderers, things like that, and going back into their childhood, a lot of them that would be and have been diagnosed as sociopaths, so that side of the umbrella, had horrible, gruesome experiences as children. And then on the other side of that is what appears to be Jeffrey Dahmer, despite the fact that his parents argued a great deal and his mother had her problems, did not suffer beatings from his parents, did not suffer, wasn't locked away in dark closets, wasn't starved. We know these things that I just described do happen to some children. Many of them survive it without becoming killers themselves, but some of them don't. I haven't been able to put my finger on anything in Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood, his upraising, that would lead me to say, that's why he became a serial killer. I think there was, my expression, a chink in the DNA armor. As they grow older, get more experience, they learn to be cunning, they learn to be clever. Jeffrey was manipulative. That was the hardest part of the series for me to watch, and I couldn't watch the last few episodes. Seeing how he manipulated the police into, oh no, this young boy, he's my boyfriend. He was naked and he was bleeding. And the police went, okay. And the woman that lived next door, that the police would not listen to her. That made me sick. But it's important to know, people that can become serial killers start learning how to lie and manipulate when they are very young.
Do you have a story or a question for me? Click the link in the description and tell me what in the world is going on.